What if Robert Baratheon's rebellion failed? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The river churns with mud and blood. Across the field, banners of black and red snap in the wind. The three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, defiant against the crowned stag, direwolf, trout, and falcon. Rhaegar Targaryen sits astride his pale white destrier and pulls his sword from a dead Baratheon bannerman. As the sword comes free, a shadowed figure walks towards him. Robert Baratheon. The Stormlord barrels forward, holding a gore-stained warhammer, but his movements are unsteady, as from the right side of his surcoat, Rhaegar spies blood seeping from his armor.
Come forward, you bastard! Face me! Where is she?
Rhaegar slowly slides off his stallion and holds his sword ready to face him on equal footing. Around them, royalists and rebels wisely decide to search for other opponents. The space between them shrinks, and Rhaegar studies the approaching figure. Robert's armor is dented, his face streaked with blood and sweat. He looks like a tempest unleashed, but Rhaegar sees the cracks beneath the fury, the sway of his shoulders, the uneven gait of his movement. Robert Baratheon is injured, perhaps gravely, but still dangerous.
Rhaegar! You took her from me! You die for it!
I took nothing from you. But if you want her, Baratheon, you'll have to go through me.
Is that what you told her father? And brother too?
Robert charges, his warhammer swinging down. Rhaegar meets it with his sword, catching it by its haft. But Rhaegar cannot match Robert's strength and has to redirect it towards the water. Robert whirls and swings again. His attacks are like a storm, and his hammer sounds like a thunderclap whenever it hits. Rhaegar counters with precision, sidestepping and parrying each movement, careful to stay out of reach. Robert swings again, the hammer aimed at Rhaegar's skull. The prince twists away, slicing a shallow gash across Robert's side. Robert howls in pain but presses forward, spinning with a backhand strike. Rhaegar leans back just as the hammer grazes past his chest. But Robert Baratheon advances, using his superior size and knocking him into the water. The prince lands with a splash, glancing up to see the fury in the lord's eyes as he brings his hammer down. Rhaegar barely rolls out of the way and thrusts his sword out, striking him across the thigh. Cursing, Robert redoubles his efforts. However, as the duel rages on, Robert begins to slow. His swings lose their ferocity, his breaths become coarse. Each swing is still strong enough to crush Rhaegar's chest if it lands, but the rebel's wounds are taking their toll. Rhaegar sees the moment, the fatal hesitation. Robert lifts his hammer one last time, but Rhaegar sidesteps and drives his sword forward, piercing Robert's chest, slipping through flesh and bone. The Stormlord's eyes widen, his hammer falling from his grasp to sink into the mud. He stares at Rhaegar, lips parting to curse him, but the words don't come. Rhaegar pulls his sword free, and Robert collapses. The battlefield falls into stunned silence. Then the rebel ranks begin to break. Cries of despair ripple through the army, men dropping their weapons and fleeing as the Targaryen forces surge forward, roaring in triumph. Rhaegar stands over Robert's lifeless body.
Lyanna is safe.
From behind, Sir Barristan approaches, his white armor covered in blood. He bows his head.
The field is yours, my prince. No, it is yours. Finish off what was started here. I am needed elsewhere.
Barristan nods, turning to the men and shouting orders as Rhaegar finds his mount and gallops off. His gaze is already turning back towards the capital. As he rides off, Robert's rage still echoes in his mind, a ghost that will haunt him forever. Taking only a few hundred of his most trusted men, Rhaegar rides off to King's Landing, and on the way back, he finds Tywin Lannister's vanguard. By now, word of his victory is spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms, and the Lion of the West wastes no time in pledging his support to Rhaegar's cause, especially when he hears what will happen next. By the time they arrive in King's Landing, the gates are now open for them, and the Mad King greets them at the Red Keep, with Jaime Lannister not far behind.
My son returns. My brave, victorious Rhaegar. You've crushed the rebellion at last.
He spreads his arms, as if expecting an embrace. When he doesn't do that, the king frowns.
You've done well, my boy. Come forward. Kneel to your king, and receive my blessing for the glory you have won in my name. There is little glory in what I did. I did not fight for your glory, father. I fought for the realm you have brought to ruin. You dare speak to me this way? I am the king. You are my son. You will kneel. I will not. You are no longer fit to sit on the Iron Throne. You dare to call me unfit? I am the king. The dragons are my blood. You are nothing without me. Tywin, have this fool taken out of my sight. You heard the king, Aerys. Step down. Step down? Step down? I would rather burn this city to the ground than hand it to you, traitor. Jaime, come forward. Kill these traitors. Kill every last one of them. No. No? You swore an oath. I swore to protect the king. That includes protecting him from himself.
He grabs Aerys by the arm, who recoils in horror at being touched and falls over, thrashing on the ground. He begins to foam at the mouth as he's dragged off. Rhaegar watches this without expression as he steps forward and sits on the Iron Throne. With the capital under his control, Rhaegar begins to summon his allies forward. First is Jon Connington, who is recalled from exile, followed by his siblings and mother on Dragonstone. Lastly, he calls Lyanna from the Tower of Joy with the Kingsguard. Together they begin consolidating their hold over the Iron Throne by accepting the surrender of the rebel lords. The first to come forward is the Stormlands, followed by Hoster Tully and Jon Arryn in exchange for his wards' lives. Ned is the last to join them. Rhaegar looks back at the mistakes Aerys made. Chief among them, the burning of multiple lords and knights. Rhaegar publicly condemns these executions, apologizes, and returns their ashes to their families. Ned accepts the urn of his father and brother with cool courtesy, saying nothing as he takes them back. Meanwhile, Rhaegar publicly declares his relationship with Lyanna. In a dramatic shift of policy, Rhaegar decides to follow the example of his ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, by taking 2 wives. He then appoints Tywin Lannister as his new hand. The Lion helps strengthen his hold by providing certain privileges to the nobles of the 7 kingdoms. Rhaegar marries his brother Viserys to Cersei for their alliance. Soon enough, the realm falls into a time of peace that is much needed after the chaos of Robert's rebellion. This time of quiet isn't just good for the people, but also for a Rhaegar who can step back and focus on his interests. He spends much of his time with his new bride, Lyanna, and his son, Aegon of the North. It is said that for every hour he spends with Elia and her children, he spends 10 with Lyanna and Aegon. When not with his family, he is drawn to prophecies and mysticism. The Song of Ice and Fire continues to haunt and leaves him obsessed with learning more. While most of the day-to-day rule is left with Tywin, Rhaegar uses Jon Connington to handle his plans. First, he dispatches maesters and scholars to bring back works from old Valyria about magic and prophecies. These men travel across the known lands to the Jade Sea and past the Wall, some going to Asai and venturing close to Valyria. They bring back tales and artifacts of ancient civilizations. He also consults with seers and oracles who study the stars and moon to try and decipher omens. Of these, only 2 things truly get his interest. The first is a spellbinder from Asai, a red-haired woman named Melisandre who claims to see visions within the flames, promising that he will bring about Azor Ahai, who is fabled to stop the Great Darkness. She whispers warnings from the north, where the world ends, telling of a ruined city there. That is where the second point of interest remains, Hardhome. He hears the story from a maester who talked to the wildlings, and the tale sounds suspiciously like the Doom. Rhaegar immediately makes preparations. He orders the North to refortify the castle of the Night's Watch, wishing all of them to be garrisoned and ordered each house to provide men. With little activity beyond the wall, this comes off as an unnecessary expense to many northern houses. This only grows worse as winter approaches. Rhaegar orders the other regions to subsidize the North's grain, putting strain on their resources too. Soon, cracks in Rhaegar's reign begin to show. Many in the Riverlands and Stormlands never truly forgave Rhaegar for his actions, but the deepest resentment runs in the north and south. Although an ally of the Targaryens during Robert's rebellion, Dorne's relationship with the crown begins to break down due to his treatment of Elia. Although polygamy isn't unheard of in the region, his neglect of Elia is taken as a slight by the Dornish people. The North is equally distrustful of the crown. Although making Lyanna queen was meant to appease them, it only further sowed resentment. Their lord Rickard and his son Brandon had gone to war, believing they were rescuing her from being kidnapped. Yet the revelation that she had gone willingly and allowed her father and brother to die such horrific deaths made the Northerners revile her as little better than a kinslayer. The arrival of winter only makes the situation worse. It is a terrible winter that lasts for years, and while Tywin tries to consult with maesters to handle the situation best, Rhaegar consults Melisandre, who insists the war is coming in the north and says that it is more important than ever to maintain vigilance. Rather than allow the soldiers on the wall to return home, he orders them to remain where they are, and for the Seven Kingdoms to continue supplying them. While an inconvenience in summer, it now turns into a true crisis in winter, as famine threatens to take over. Only Tywin's skillful leadership and loans to buy extra grain prevent this. Rhaegar spends this time training his son, Aegon, to rule, showing him how to fight and informing him of the prophecy. With snow bearing down on the Red Keep, the two spend entire days in the training hall under the watchful eye of Willem Darry and Arthur Dane, who instruct them in the ways of combat. But when spring comes, the hopes of peace are shattered by Rhaegar's announcement that he intends to make Aegon, who may have been called Jon Snow in another world, son of Lyanna Stark, his successor. This is the final straw for Dorne, who already felt as if their princess was slighted. Now they see their prince having his birthright taken away from him. The Dornish indeed declare Elia's son Aegon be crowned, naming him Aegon of Dorne. To remove any confusion, yes, both Rhaegar's sons were named Aegon. Alone, this would not have been a serious issue, but the Dornish find allies in the Greyjoys, who also long for independence, and the Stormlands, who never forgave Rhaegar for killing Robert. To make matters worse, Tywin is nowhere to be seen. Rhaegar's declaration enraged him. For years he had kept the kingdoms together while Rhaegar was off consulting seers and oracles, and he found himself thinking of him more and more like the Mad King. Rather than dealing with him a second time, Tywin decides to take action, crowning Viserys King of the Seven Kingdoms. He gains the backing of the Riverlands, which were rebuilt thanks in large part to Tywin's efforts. Surprisingly, the North refuses to back Aegon of the North, instead opting to remain neutral. This is due to them feeling no loyalty towards him, leaving Rhaegar with only the Vale, Crownlands, and the Reach as allies. The war was unlike anything the Seven Kingdoms had seen in centuries. Rhaegar Targaryen leads his forces with brilliance and ferocity. He moves not as a prince, but as a soldier across the Seven Kingdoms to confront Tywin while his subordinates deal with the Dornish. Jon Cunnington harries the Dornish along the Boneway, while Arthur Dane leads a lightning strike in the Stormlands to disrupt their supply lines before marching to join him. The Dornish army, led by Prince Oberyn Martell, fights with their characteristic venom, but they are no match for the disciplined precision of Dane and his men. The desert roads run red with blood as the Sword of the Morning carves a path through the vanguard. The Ironborn raid the western shores of the Reach, hoping to force Rhaegar to divide his attention, but Rhaegar anticipates their moves, dispatching the Redwind fleet alongside Stannis Baratheon, who chooses to remain loyal to the crown. Together, the Ironborn are routed near Fair Island, and their famed longships burn. At the heart of the conflict lies the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister, ever the tactician, holds Riverrun with a formidable host, but Rhaegar's forces, though outnumbered, rush in. However, the River Lords prove to be ferocious foes, using the rivers to launch ambush after ambush, beating down Rhaegar's army as Tywin assembles his troops. But the River Lords are fickle, and while many fight for Hoster Tully, others like Houses Frey and Bracken are not so loyal. They secretly send guides to assist Rhaegar, allowing him to launch a daring night raid to Riverrun. By dawn, Tywin's forces are in disarray, and the proud lion retreats to the Golden Tooth, while Riverrun surrenders and crosses their banners. Unfortunately, without the Ironborn to support them, the royal fleet lands at Lannisport, seizing the city, cutting Tywin off and forcing his army to surrender. The Dornish are the last to fall, exhausted from months of conflict. They attempt one final stand near Summerhall, but the Crownlands and Reach forces close in from both sides, crushing their resistance in a pincer maneuver. Oberyn Martell himself yields to the blade of Arthur Dayne, but not before the Red Viper slays 2 of the Kingsguard, including Gerald the White Bull. Meanwhile, Jon Cunnington rushes to Sunspear to accept their surrender. The war is over, but victory comes at a terrible cost. Rhaegar's reign is badly reduced, and his position is more unstable than ever. Countless soldiers from all sides are captured, including Tywin Lannister. All of them are sent to the Wall to further strengthen the Night's Watch. But the worst casualties are to his family. Elia Martell now remains in King's Landing, but more a prisoner than a wife. Meanwhile, Aegon of Dorne is killed in Summerhall. Viserys and Daenerys suffer a far worse fate. Melisandre continues to whisper to Rhaegar, promising him visions of the future, and to awaken the stone dragons of Dragonstone. But in exchange, she requires king's blood. With his position now weaker than ever, Rhaegar retreats to Dragonstone to consult with the Red Woman. Far away from the carnage, Ned Stark stands at its heart, his face grim and tired. Across from him, Jaime Lannister and Barristan Selmy sit uneasily. Between them is Lyanna Stark and the teenage Aegon of the North.
You don't understand, Ned. This war isn't just about the throne. It's about the future. Aegon has a great destiny ahead of him. If we let him fall into the wrong hands...
Future? What about the present, Lyanna? What about the thousands of men dying? What about our brother and father who burned because of your choices? You didn't want Robert. Fine. I would have fought for you. But instead you ran off with Rhaegar and left the rest of us to pay the price.
For love. For freedom. Would you have me marry a man who would bed every tavern wench? Would you have me live as a prisoner to someone else's desires?
The crow calls the raven black. Do I need to remind you that your own prince was married when you fell into his arms? With children whose blood now soaks the ruins of Summerhall?
What I would have, Lyanna, is for you to see the consequences of what you've done. This boy may be the prince that Rhaegar claims, but look around you. There is no honor in this war. I will not force my lords to die in this carnage.
Please. You're my brother. My blood. You wouldn't turn away from your own kin.
I will give you shelter, but the North will take no part in Rhaegar's war.
As agreed, Ned takes the boy on as his ward. He spends his time observing him, watching Aegon train with his son, Robb. In contrast to his cold relationship with his sister, the two quickly become as close as brothers. He also sees the talent in Aegon's swordsmanship and leadership. But unlike Rhaegar, Aegon doesn't seem motivated by destiny. He watches as the prince talks to his cousins normally, but there is a sadness about him, a weight on his shoulders, as if the world has been dropped on him. Despite himself, Ned finds empathy with the boy for having to deal with his so-called destiny, just as Ned had to deal with the stewardship of the North. The two find themselves growing closer, as Lord Stark becomes the confidant that Aegon never had, where he doesn't have to be the prince who was promised. simply Aegon of the North. Catelyn also proves to be a great help, as she acts as a maternal figure to Aegon, helping him learn to fit into Winterfell. For several weeks, there is quiet in the North, as they enjoy this time, untouched by the war, until a raven arrives with a short message. The time has come. We march to Hardhome. The reports from the Night's Watch arrive, speaking of strange occurrences beyond the wall, camps of wildlings found abandoned, strange sounds in the woods, and worse, bodies that disappear. They aren't alone either. The wildling emissaries Rhaegar welcomed south tell similar stories. Shadows moving through the forests, entire families vanishing in the night, and the dead rising to walk again. This is enough for Ned to march out, calling his banners to the wall. There they are joined by another force, the prisoners taken during the War of the Three Dragons from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. There are many great lords among them who were captured. Tytos Blackwood, Tywin Lannister, Loras Tyrell, Oberyn Martell, Renly Baratheon, all of them captured during the war. Ned secretly wonders whether Rhaegar allowed them to be captured to get them in one place. But as they venture beyond, they are joined by even more allies. Mance Rayder and his wildlings eagerly join, bolstered by promises made by Rhaegar. When they finally arrive at Hardhome, the settlement is little more than a scattering of broken huts and windswept cliffs. They all work tirelessly to fortify the settlement in preparation for Rhaegar's arrival. Many days pass until the fleet arrives, but Rhaegar is not among them. A deafening roar echoes through the woods, causing men to leap to their feet and grab their weapons. But the creature does not emerge from the trees. It flies over them. A massive dragon, black as the abyss, circles overhead. In front of Hardhome, the dragon lands, its massive wings folding as it lets out another earth-shaking roar. On its back, King Rhaegar.
Tonight, we fight not just for thrones or crowns, but for life itself.
As if in answer, the forest erupts. The dead come alive, pouring from the trees in unholy waves, their empty eyes glowing blue. White Walkers stride among them. A chill sweeps across the battlefield as the true enemy reveals itself. Melisandre steps forward. Her voice carries above the din as she chants in High Valyrian. A sudden burst of light emanates from her hands, and the swords of the living burst into flames. The living warriors brace themselves as they meet the undead in battle. The clash is chaos. Firelit swords cut through whites, their charred remains falling to the frozen ground. Wildlings fight like demons, their axes and spears whirling. But the dead are endless. And for every white that falls, another takes its place. Ned Stark fights at its head, ice glowing with an otherworldly fire as it cuts through the dead. But the tide of battle is overwhelming. A White Walker steps forward. Its frost-covered blade meets ice in a clash that sends Ned reeling. The icy blade finds his shoulder, and Ned falls to his knees. But before the White Walker finishes him off, Aegon leaps up and plunges his dagger into the White Walker's neck, sending it shattering apart. He rushes over to his uncle, but Ned presses ice into the boy's hand.
Take it. Do what must be done.
Taking the sword in his hand, Aegon rushes out and shouts for his men to take position. He runs through the front lines, rallying the soldiers as best he can. Everywhere the line seems to falter, he's there, giving encouragement and reinforcing their faltering lines. With ice in hand, Aegon feels faster and stronger with each swing striking as if it weighs nothing. By his side are Sir Barristan and Jaime, who almost appear like pale ghosts that cut through the swaths of whites. Up in the air, Rhaegar flies above on his dragon, shouting columns of fire that burn through entire ranks of whites. The lines begin to stabilize, and the defenses of Hardhome hold. But from atop one of the cliffs, the Night King raises his spear and takes aim. It strikes Rhaegar's dragon in the chest, and with a deafening roar, the beast plummets from the sky, crashing into the battlefield. Jon Cunnington rushes to his side and manages to pull Rhaegar out from the wounded dragon. the king orders them to retreat, and Dane signals a withdrawal. Rushing through the pre-planned routes that lead back the way they came or aboard selected ships, Aegon joins Jon, cutting his way through the undead as the three circle around the dragon while the zombies press forward. Suddenly, Rhaegar grabs Jon's shoulder and orders him to lead his troops to safety. Reluctantly, the knight complies and hurries off, but Rhaegar and Aegon do not run. Instead, they climb into the flagship as the Night King approaches, reaching out for the dragon and raising his arms up and letting the beast rise with them. It turns and faces them, but Aegon simply smiles and holds his sword ready as the dragon unleashes its fire onto the ship, which sends the sky erupting in green flames as the hidden wildfire ignites. The inferno sweeps across the battlefield, consuming the dead in its unrelenting blaze. The Night King himself is caught in the flames, his icy form cracking and shattering as the green fire engulfs him along with the dragon and his entire army. The survivors watch from the safety of the sea or deep in the woods. Even from the wall, it is as if a second star has burned on the ground. But from the inferno, a figure emerges, unscathed by the flames. Rhaegar Targaryen. Slowly, Ned begins to drop to his knees, followed by all other lords.
All hail Aegon VI, the prince who was promised.
With Aegon now king, he returns to King's Landing to begin to rebuild. He saw the work his father had done to prepare the Seven Kingdoms for the Long Night, but he also saw his failings and the damage he did. As an act of reunification, he names his surviving sister, Rhaenyra, heir to the throne. The first thing Aegon does is pardon those men punished for the War of the Three Dragons, allowing them to return home. He then begins the process of truly starting to improve the Seven Kingdoms, investing lords and ladies from all across the land to discuss the needs of their lands. Unlike his father, Aegon vows to take an active role in ruling. As for Rhaegar, no one knows what happened to him. Some say he was consumed alongside the Night King, but some maesters believe he may have survived and simply left to live in the wilds beyond the wall. What is known is that Lyanna soon disappears as well. Some maesters believe they wished to let their son rule in his own right and decided to live the rest of their lives away from the kingdoms. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.